Okay, so we've got started. We've set up our application. We've had a quick look at how we create components and what we think about when we're creating components. So let's look at signals. So signals, if you think about signals initially, they're very much like use state in React. If you don't know what use state in React is, it's a way of storing information locally to your component that you can then use in your component. So what do I mean by that? So let's have a look. So if we do something like this, we can use count, and we'll set count. So here we are. This is, I always like to put that at the top. Okay, so here we are. We've got this thing called CreateSignal. This comes from SolidJS, and we're passing it a value of 0. Then in these square brackets, we have two things that we've got. We've got count, which says here it's an accessor to a number. Well, the number's here. So count is actually a way of accessing the number that we store in the signal. And set count is a setter. So as it says, it's a way of setting the number that's stored in the signal. So what do we mean by that? Let's have a look. So let's get rid of that. We can have our H1, and we'll just put my count is, and then in here we'll do count. So if anyone's coming from React, you may notice a difference here. So you can see that accessing the count in React, you would just put count without the brackets, as we call them. But in Solid, you use the brackets. That's because this is actually a function. In React, this is a value. In Solid, this is a function. So we don't need the hero section. So let's have a look, see what this looks like. So my count is 0. Okay. So what if we wanted to set this count? What if we wanted to change this count? So we could do something like set interval. And that would be every second. So that's every 1,000 milliseconds. And we'll set count. Now there's a couple of ways that you could do this. You can do this with using count, the actual value, and then saying like +1. Or you can use a function in here, an arrow function, which uses the previous, which is still a number, as you can see. So previous is the number that's already in the signal. And then we can just say previous +1. So I sort of mix and match across these, but I think in this case it makes sense. It sort of shows you what you're doing. You're taking the previous number or previous value. So we could even put something like that. Prev number, or previous count even might be better. So it just makes it easy to read if anybody else is coming to your code. That's my personal opinion anyway. As you can see, every second now, the count is going up. But what's interesting about about Solid is that in React, every time use state, as it's called in React, is set, it re-renders the component. So if I was to do a console log here, in React, every time this set interval ran, this render function would run. But as you can see, even though this is running, the render function or the render console log is only ever done once, because when this function runs, it only runs once. The signal targets its updates to this specific piece of code, this specific node here. Now what we can do is we can say, we can use CreateEffect, which in React is useEffect. Now useEffect runs every time something changes if you pass it a dependency array. So if you pass it count in React, then every time count updates, then the useEffect would update. So CreateEffect is very similar to that. However, you don't need to pass a dependency array. You can just pass it that. So we can say and then maybe so now, as you can see, each time the count updates, it re-renders. Now one other thing about signals is they're completely independent of the component, which is not the case in React. So we can actually move this up here. And also this, if I remember rightly. And it will work completely independently. Still working, still rendering. But now the state and the effect are outside of the app. And we're still controlling the count from inside the app by setting the count on the set interval. So there we are. That's an introduction to signals and the differences between signals and use state. Let's move on.